The road that led Franz here wasn't paved with glory, but with quiet resolve and hard lessons. When he enlisted in the Marines, it wasn't out of patriotism or familial duty. It was a need to escape the stagnation of a small-town life that offered little more than faded horizons. His father's garage smelled of oil and disappointment, and his mother's hands were worn from years of work that never amounted to prosperity. He'd seen what staying put could do, and he wasn't willing to succumb to that fate. Boot camp stripped away who Franz was and rebuilt him into someone he barely recognized, a man who understood precision, discipline, and the necessity of detachment. He learned how to move without being seen, how to endure discomfort without complaint, and how to calculate a perfect shot under pressure. The first time he pulled the trigger on the range, he felt something click inside him. Shooting wasn't just a skill, it was a calling. Franz's first deployment wasn't what he expected. The romanticized ideals of heroism vanished in the face of reality. War wasn't cinematic, it was chaotic and brutal. He'd seen men cry for their mothers and heard the hollow laughter of those who'd survived another close call. He wasn't immune to fear or guilt, but he learned to bury those feelings deep enough to function. Years later, Franz's reputation as a sniper grew. It wasn't pride that drove him, but the understanding that every target eliminated saved lives on their side. Falcon's dossier was handed to him with a simple directive: neutralize the threat. Falcon wasn't the first target Franz had been assigned, but his infamy made this mission different. It wasn't just the Marines who wanted him gone. It was the people of this region who suffered under his reign. Franz spent weeks studying Falcon's patterns and the nuances of his movements. Falcon wasn't careless. He was a ghost. Franz and his team followed whispers and clues, piecing together a puzzle that led them to this compound. As Franz lay in the suffocating heat of the desert, waiting for his moment, he thought about the lives Falcon had destroyed. This wasn't about duty. It was about ending a cycle of pain. Every mission before this had hardened Franz, but this one felt heavier. It wasn't the weight of the rifle or the sweltering heat. It was the knowledge that this could be his last. The stakes were higher, the risk greater, but failure wasn't an option. As he adjusted his scope and waited for Falcon to appear, Franz wasn't thinking about medals or accolades. He was thinking about his daughter, Emily, and the kind of world he wanted her to grow up in. The desert was merciless, an endless expanse of sand and stone, blistering hot by day and freezing at night. Franz lay motionless for 6 hours, half buried in grit, his camouflage net barely shielding him from the harsh Afghan sun. Sweat dripped down his back, but he didn't flinch. Here, any movement could mean the end. Through the precision lens of his rifle's scope, Franz focused intently on the decaying structure in the distance. Intelligence had identified it as the lair of a militant figurehead, known only by the codename Falcon. For months, this man had evaded capture. His name was irrelevant compared to the trail of devastation he left behind. Today, that trail would end. Corporal Hernandez, his spotter, whispered in his earpiece, "Wind shift, 1 o'clock, light breeze." Franz adjusted his scope, aiming at the compound's doorway. Falcon hadn't appeared yet, but patience was key. The desert played tricks. Mirages distorted shapes, and ants crawled into his gear. He endured. Movement wasn't an option. Finally, the doorway stirred. 2 tangos, Hernandez reported. Franz's finger hovered on the trigger as 2 armed men emerged. Neither was Falcon. He exhaled slowly, heartbeat steady, hands firm, minutes ticking by. Then Falcon stepped out, his face unmistakable from the dossier. Sharp features, cruel eyes. "That's him," Hernandez confirmed. "Range 800 meters, wind 2 o'clock, 3 knots. Franz adjusted, years of training taking over. Inhale, hold, exhale. The crosshairs aligned above Falcon's chest. He squeezed the trigger, a smooth, practiced motion. The rifle's crack echoed briefly. Through the scope, Franz saw the bullet strike true. Falcon collapsed, his guards panicked, searching the horizon in vain. Target down, Hernandez confirmed, though Franz already knew. "Pack it up," Franz ordered, his body stiff from hours of stillness. They quickly dismantled the hide and moved toward the extraction point 3 clicks west. As they trekked, Franz reflected. Falcon was his 18th confirmed elimination. There was no pride, only grim satisfaction. Lives had been saved today. The hum of a Black Hawk broke the silence. As the chopper lifted off, Franz glanced back at the compound. Soon, the desert would erase all evidence of their mission. For over a year, Franz had lived in this barren wasteland. Sandstorms, sleepless nights, constant danger. His rifle was an extension of himself, but the real weight was the longing for home. He missed Claire, his wife, and their daughter, Emily. Calls had grown infrequent, strained by time and distance. Yet a photo of Emily in her ballet costume, beaming beside Claire, gave him strength. The wait was nearly over. In 7 days, he'd be home. The plane landed with a jolt. Stepping onto American soil for the first time in a year, Franz inhaled deeply. The air felt alive. Slinging his duffel over his shoulder, he scanned the airfield for Claire and Emily. They weren't there. The cab ride blurred as anticipation built. When the car stopped, Wilbur, their old Labrador, greeted him with excited barks. Franz knelt, burying his face in the dog's fur. "Miss me, buddy." Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Dropping his bag, Franz's boots echoed down the hall. Something felt wrong. Unease grew as he reached Emily's room and gently pushed the door open. Emily lay small and pale under the blankets, an IV drip attached to her hand. Franz's heart clenched. "Emily," he whispered, rushing to her side. "It's Daddy. Wake up." Her eyes fluttered open. A smile lit her face. "Daddy." She threw her arms around his neck. Franz held her tightly, throat tight. "What's going on, sweetheart? Why do you have this? Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she said softly. "Just a little sick. The doctor said I'll get better soon." "Why didn't anyone tell me? Where's Mommy?" Emily hesitated. "She's out." "Out where?" Franz pressed gently, her lip quivering. "With her boyfriend, Liam." Franz froze, jaw tightening. "Her boyfriend? What do you mean?" Tears filled her eyes. "I heard Mommy talking to him. She said when you find out she's pregnant with his baby, you get mad. Then they'd say you're dangerous and put you in jail." Franz clenched his fists, then forced himself calm. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded, tears streaming. "Please, Daddy, don't hurt anyone. Just take me away. Leave Mommy. We'll be okay, just us." Franz cupped her face. "I promise I'll protect you. Trust me." Leaving her to rest, Franz walked into the living room, mind racing. He called Major Carter. "Franz," Carter answered. "What's going on?" "There's a problem," Franz said tightly. "My wife's pregnant by another man and planning to frame me as a threat. My daughter overheard everything. I found Emily alone and sick, hooked to an IV." Carter's tone sharpened. "Stay calm. Don't give them any excuse." "What should I do?" "Call CPS," Carter advised. "Explain everything. They'll help protect Emily. Get a family lawyer, too." "Understood," Franz replied, resolve hardening. "Thank you, sir." Franz returned to Emily's room, sitting beside her. "It'll be okay, sweetheart. I'll handle this. Trust me," he said softly. He called Child Protective Services. After 2 rings, a calm voice answered. "CPS, this is Priscilla Rich. How can I help?" "My name is Franz Herron," he said. "I just came home from deployment to find my daughter sick and neglected. Her mother is focused on her boyfriend instead of caring for her. I need help." Priscilla's tone turned serious. "Where are you?" "I'll come immediately." Within 30 minutes, Priscilla arrived, clipboard in hand. Franz explained everything. Emily's condition, the IV administered by a friend, and Claire's neglect. Her face darkened as she listened. "I need to speak with Emily," she said. In the bedroom, Priscilla knelt beside Emily and spoke gently. "Hi, Emily. I'm here to help. Can you tell me how you've been feeling?" Emily hesitated. "I've been sick a long time. Mommy doesn't take care of me. She's always with her boyfriend." "When was the last time you saw a doctor?" Priscilla asked, her tone firm but kind. 3 weeks ago. Mommy's friend does this." She pointed to the IV. Priscilla's expression tightened. "Thank you for telling me. You're very brave. I'll make sure you're safe." She turned to Franz. "This is unacceptable. We'll act immediately to protect her." Priscilla stepped out to make calls, returning with papers. "These are for an emergency restraining order. Fill them out now." Franz complied just as the doorbell rang. It was Joseph Kerr, a lawyer and friend. "Thanks for coming," Franz said, introducing him to Priscilla. Joseph reviewed the situation. "The restraining order is a good start. We'll file for custody next. Document everything: texts, calls, any evidence of neglect." Priscilla added, "The restraining order will be processed tonight. I'll schedule follow-ups to ensure Emily's safety." Franz exhaled, his anger tempered by gratitude. "Thank you. I just want her safe." "She will be," Priscilla assured him. They finalized the forms, outlining steps to protect Emily. Later, Dr. Brown arrived to examine Emily. After a thorough check, he said, "She needs more tests. Bring her to the clinic tomorrow. Keep her rested and hydrated for now." Franz thanked him and returned to Emily's side, holding her small hand. "I'll keep you safe," he whispered as she drifted to sleep. That night, the sound of the front door opening shattered the silence. Franz, sitting in the living room with a firearm resting across his lap, tensed as Claire and Liam stumbled in, laughing. They froze at the sight of him. Claire's face paled. "Franz, what are you doing?" she demanded. Franz rose slowly, his voice cold. "Stop right there." He raised the firearm slightly, not aiming, but making his point. "This ends now." Liam tried to act calm. "Let's talk this out, man. No need for this." Franz's voice dropped, steely. "Don't take another step." He tossed a folded paper onto the table. "That's a restraining order. Claire, you're not welcome here. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. Leave or I'll call the cops." Claire's face twisted in anger. "You can't do this. I'll tell everyone you threatened me with that tool." Franz smirked, pointing to his phone on the table, recording their conversation. "Go ahead, everything's documented." Liam faltered. "You can't just kick her out. This is my house." Franz said firmly, "Emily's safety comes first. Leave." Now Claire stepped forward defiant. "What are you going to do?" "Shoot me." "Don't test me," Franz warned. "Walk out or the police will handle it." "Your call." Claire hesitated, then stormed out, dragging Liam with her. "You'll regret this, Franz," she spat. "Maybe," he replied coldly, "but not tonight." Once the door slammed shut, Franz set the firearm down, his hands trembling as the adrenaline wore off. He knew the fight wasn't over, but Emily's safety was all that mattered. 2 days later, Claire was served divorce papers and Liam faced a lawsuit for alienation of affection. In court, Claire pleaded for counseling to save the marriage, but Franz and his lawyer stood firm. "This is about Emily's welfare, not reconciliation," Joseph argued. Though the judge initially mandated counseling, Franz vowed to fight for Emily's safety, his focus unwavering. "She deserves better," he told Joseph. "I won't stop until she's safe." That night, Franz lay alone in bed, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting shadows across the room. The silence of the house was broken only by the faint rustling of leaves outside. His mind churned relentlessly, replaying the betrayals and the neglect of his daughter. Each memory stoked the fire of his anger, leaving him restless. Staring at the ceiling, he let his thoughts spiral. Claire's actions had crossed a line, and there was no path back. His mind entertained dark scenarios. But Emily's face always brought him back. Revenge tempted him, but the cost was too great. His daughter needed him. Hours passed as Franz wrestled with his emotions. Exhaustion eventually dulled his anger, and sleep crept in. One thought lingered as he drifted off. Claire was out of his life, and she would face the consequences for what she'd done. The news of Claire's dismissal came on a cold morning, delivered via an impersonal email. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Dear Mrs. Heron, after careful consideration, we regret to inform you that your employment has been terminated, effective immediately. We wish you success in your future endeavors. Sincerely, HR Department." Claire's hands trembled as she closed the laptop. Her face flushed with anger and humiliation. She knew why this had happened. Word of her affair with a Marine's husband had spread, and the scandal was too much for her company. Later that day, Liam stormed into the apartment they had rented after Franz kicked Claire out. He threw his bag on the floor, his face red with anger. "They fired me too," he spat. "My boss said I'm bad for business. Unethical conduct, he called it. Can you believe that?" Claire buried her face in her hands. "This is all falling apart," she muttered. "What are we going to do?" Liam scoffed, pacing the room. "What am I supposed to do, Claire? I took a risk for you, and now I'm paying for it." She shot him a glare. "Don't act like you're innocent. You were just as involved in this as I was." He threw his hands up. "Maybe we should have thought this through before blowing up your marriage." The weight of their actions settled heavily in the room. Without jobs or stability, their future was bleak. For the first time, Claire truly felt the depth of her loss. Not just her career, but her family, and the respect of those around her. 2 weeks later, Franz sat across from a counselor in a small, quiet office. His posture was rigid, his hands clasped tightly. The counselor, calm and patient, broke the silence. "So," she began gently, "why are you here today? How are you feeling about everything?" Franz clenched his jaw, his mind flashing back to the courtroom and Claire's betrayal. He exhaled sharply before answering. "I'm here because the court ordered it. Honestly, this feels like a waste of time." The counselor nodded, unfazed. "Let's talk about your daughter." His expression softened slightly. "Emily's been sick. Claire was too busy with her lover to care for her. My daughter was neglected, left to suffer alone. I can't forgive that. Claire doesn't deserve another chance." The counselor nodded, taking notes. "It's clear your daughter's well-being is your priority, but Claire has expressed remorse and a willingness to attend counseling. Could this be an opportunity to heal? For Emily's sake." Franz's laugh was bitter. "You think I should trust her? After all the lies and manipulation, she's putting on an act, and I'm not falling for it." The counselor's tone remained steady. "I understand your pain, but trust can be rebuilt over time. If she's genuine, wouldn't it be worth trying?" Franz's hands gripped the chair tightly. "You don't get it. She's not sorry. She's playing the sufferer. I can see through her lies." The counselor leaned forward slightly. "Healing takes effort from both sides. Claire needs to show she's committed, but if you close the door entirely, it could affect Emily's relationship with her mother." Franz's eyes narrowed. "I'm a Marine. I've faced worse than this. Pain doesn't stop me. I move forward. Claire isn't getting another chance. Not after what she's done." He stood abruptly. "Thanks for the chat, but I've had enough." Without another word, he walked out, determined to protect his daughter and prove Claire's true nature. The next morning, Franz's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the newspaper from the doorstep. His eyes locked onto the headline, "Man Found Dead, Possible Loan Shark Connection." His heart skipped. The name wasn't familiar, but the mention of loan shark struck a chord. He knew their type, dangerous men lurking in the shadows, their hands always dirty. His mind raced. Could this be it? He thought. A chance to make Claire pay. To make them all pay. He grabbed his phone and dialed Joseph's number. his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. The call connected after 2 rings. "Franz," Joseph said cautiously. "What's going on?" "I've got an idea," Franz said, his tone urgent. "It's about the loan sharks. A guy in the paper. I know him. This could work." Joseph's silence stretched before he responded, his voice serious. "Franz, stop. This isn't the way you'll destroy everything you've been fighting for." "I don't care anymore," Franz replied coldly. "Claire deserves to face the consequences. This is how." Joseph sighed, a mix of frustration and concern in his tone. "I can't let you do this. It's reckless, dangerous. You'll lose everything. Let's find another way." "This is the only way," Franz snapped. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm doing it." The line went quiet before Joseph finally said, "I won't support this, but I'll be here if you need me. Just think before you act." The call ended, leaving Franz staring at the phone. His decision was made. That evening, Franz and Joseph entered a smoky, dimly lit bar called The Cave. The stale stench of cigarettes and whiskey, mixed with murmured voices, created an atmosphere of tension and secrecy. Franz's eyes scanned the room, searching for familiar faces, the kind who thrived in shadows. Joseph leaned in, his voice low and urgent. "Franz, why are we here? This is insane. Let's leave now while we still can." Franz didn't respond immediately. His attention was fixed on a group of men in the back, their movements deliberate, their eyes darting as they whispered among themselves. "Relax," Franz said firmly. "We're just here to talk. Trust me." "Trust you?" Joseph hissed. "You're dragging us into a powder keg. You don't even know how this will end." Before Franz could reply, a towering figure emerged from the shadows. The man strode toward them, his presence commanding. He stopped in front of Franz, his expression unreadable. "The boss wants to see you," the man said in a gravelly voice. Joseph's eyes widened. "This is it. Let's walk away." But Franz remained calm, nodding to the man. "Lead the way." Joseph's protests died as Franz silenced him with a glance. There was no turning back. They were led to a dim room with thick velvet curtains and the faint smell of cigars. At the far end, an imposing man sat in a leather chair, his size and aura radiating power. He stood as they entered, his every movement deliberate and measured. To Franz's surprise, the man broke into a wide grin. "God, it's been ages," he boomed, stepping forward to envelop Franz in a bear hug, lifting him briefly off the ground. "Franz Heron, the man who saved my life." Franz allowed himself a rare smile. "Good to see you, Mike. It's been a while." Mike stepped back, his grin unwavering. "You're the reason I'm still standing. Back in Baghdad, you pulled me out of hell. I owe you everything." Turning to the men in the shadows, Mike announced, "This is Franz Heron, the real deal." The others nodded respectfully, their sharp eyes assessing him. Mike gestured to a table laden with expensive liquor. "Drink." Joseph hesitated, his discomfort clear. Franz nodded to reassure him and accepted a glass. Mike's gaze shifted to Joseph, his tone light but firm. "Relax, you're with Franz, so you're with me." As they raised their glasses, Mike's tone darkened slightly. "Franz's enemies are my enemies." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Joseph stiffened, his unease palpable. Franz met Mike's gaze, the faintest hint of a plan forming in his mind. This was the beginning of something dangerous, something Claire would never see coming. As Franz recounted the ordeal, Claire's betrayal, her lies, and the neglect of Emily, Mike listened in silence, his face growing darker with each word. Franz's voice dripped with bitterness, the raw pain unmistakable. When he finished, Mike leaned back in his chair, his massive frame exuding menace. "Damn, Mike," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's low, Franz. You deserve better." His eyes gleamed with dangerous intensity. "Say the word, and I'll take care of it. Claire, her lover, gone, no questions asked." The offer hung in the air, and Franz felt his stomach churn. He'd anticipated this, but hearing it aloud made it real. He didn't flinch, though. His decision was already made. He let the silence linger, his mind racing. Joseph, quiet until now, finally spoke. "Mike, this isn't the way," he said cautiously. "If Claire and her lover vanish, the cops will be all over Franz. It's too risky." Franz shot him a sharp look. "I've thought it through," he said firmly. "They won't get away with this, but we need to be smart." Mike raised a hand, signaling for calm. "Joseph's right. We can't leave a mess. But I've got ways to make it clean. An accident. No loose ends. They're gone. And you get your piece." Franz shook his head. "No, they don't get off that easy," he said coldly. "I have a plan. Something that'll destroy them without anyone suspecting me." Mike's lips curled into a cold grin. "That's the Franz I know. Always thinking ahead. All right, we'll play it your way. Just tell me what you need." Joseph leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I'm in," he said reluctantly. "But we need to cover every angle. No mistakes." Franz nodded, the weight of his decision settling. "There won't be any mistakes. This ends now, on my terms." Mike raised his glass in a toast. "To making things right." Joseph hesitated but joined, their glasses clinking in the dim room. Nothing more needed to be said. The plan was in motion. At a bustling coffee shop, Claire and Liam sat in tense silence, the hum of conversations filling the air. Claire sipped her latte, her attention flicking to the two men at the next table. They were speaking in low tones, pointing to a map spread across the table. "It's prime real estate," one said, tapping a circled spot. "We need to move fast." Claire leaned closer, trying to listen. When the first man mentioned an address, her heart skipped. Her brow furrowed as recognition dawned. "That's my house," she blurted out. The men froze, exchanging glances before turning to her. "Excuse me," the first man asked. Claire straightened, a faint smile on her lips. "The property you're talking about, it's my house." The second man frowned. "Your house or your husband's?" Claire hesitated but recovered. "Technically my husband's, but I can sell it." The men exchanged skeptical looks before the second one spoke. "Last we heard, you were trying to reconcile. If that's true, you might not get it." Claire's grip tightened on her cup. "I'm not reconciling," she said flatly. "I'm filing for divorce. I'll get the house, and then I'll sell." The first man studied her, his tone careful. "Even if you divorce, you might only get half. Courts usually split assets, and the rest stays with him." Claire's jaw clenched. "Half? Why should I settle for that? It's my house." The second man shrugged. "That's how it works. Unless you can prove something drastic, the court won't award you more." Claire's mind raced. "What if I convince him to agree to more? Is there a way to make this work in my favor?" The first man leaned in. "Timing is everything. If you push for more now, and he agrees before the property value spikes, you could come out ahead. Once the mall development near your house is public, the value will skyrocket." "How much?" Claire asked, her eyes narrowing. "Could increase 20-fold, the first man said, his tone almost calculating. "But you'll have to act fast before anyone else knows." Claire's lips pressed into a determined line. She nodded slowly, her mind already calculating her next move. Claire's pulse quickened at the thought of such a massive profit. Her excitement was tempered by a deep furrow of worry as she leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers nervously on the table. "I don't have that kind of money," she admitted quietly, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The men exchanged a knowing glance before one leaned forward, his expression sharp and calculated. "You don't need the money yet," he said smoothly, "but we know someone who can help." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Who?" The quieter man finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Mike Baker. He's your guy when banks won't play ball. But let's be clear, He doesn't forgive debts, and he won't hesitate to collect by any means necessary. Claire's stomach turned at the name. Mike Baker, she repeated, a mix of disbelief and fear. I've heard of him. He's dangerous. Before she could say more, Liam gripped her arm tightly, making her flinch. His voice dropped to a tense whisper. Claire, listen to me. You don't want to owe someone like Mike. If you can't pay him back, he won't just take what you owe. He'll take everything. He'll liquidate you. A shiver ran through Claire, but her desperation overpowered her fear. She pulled her arm free, her voice trembling as she asked, How much would I need? The first man adjusted his tie, offering a professional but hollow smile. That's for you to decide. Mike can lend you what you need to make it happen. But remember, he always collects. He never forgets. Claire's heartbeat thundered as the enormity of her predicament sank in. The men rose from their seats, their movements synchronized and precise. One slid a card across the table. Call us if you get the house, he said coolly. Claire clutched the card, frozen in place as they left the cafe. Her grip tightened as she stared at it, her mind racing. After a moment, she nodded to herself. I'll call, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. 2 days later, Franz sat stiffly in the waiting room for what was supposed to be a joint counseling session, his hands clasped tightly as Melinda, the counselor, approached with a neutral expression. Mr. Heron, she began, her tone measured. I've asked you before if you're willing to give Claire another chance. Reconciliation is possible if both of you are open to it. Franz scoffed, shaking his head with a faint mocking smile. Lady, reading textbooks and running mock scenarios might get you a counseling license, but it doesn't make you an expert on people. Melinda's expression hardened, though her voice remained steady. Mr. Heron, I'm a professional. You need to approach this with an open mind. Franz stood towering over her desk. You're not listening. Claire is a liar, plain and simple. I'm not falling for her act. Melinda frowned, her voice growing more assertive. Have you even tried to understand her? Franz interrupted sharply. No, I'm done understanding someone who's been lying to me all along. But if you want to play games, let's make it interesting. Melinda blinked. Games? What are you talking about? Franz leaned closer, his smile cold. A bet. If you prove me wrong, I'll keep coming to these sessions. But if I'm right, you do exactly as I say. A Marine's word. Melinda hesitated, her professionalism battling with curiosity. Fine, she said at last. If I win, you continue counseling. If you win, I'll follow your lead. Agreed. Agreed, Franz said, leaning back with a smirk. The door opened, and Claire entered with a defiant air. Her outfit was provocative, a low-cut top and a skirt that barely met decency standards. Melinda greeted her with strained politeness. Claire, welcome. Let's begin. Claire cut her off with a sharp voice. Spare me the formalities. Let me talk. Melinda faltered as Claire turned to Franz, venom dripping from her tone. He wants a divorce. Fine, I'll give it to him. Just give me the house, and we're done. Melinda nodded. But Claire, you said. I don't care, Claire snapped, rolling her eyes. I was cheating, and I don't regret it. My lover, Liam, at least he's good in bed, unlike this Marine playing toy soldier. Franz stayed silent, his expression unreadable. Claire wasn't finished, she sneered. And your sick daughter, she can rot for all I care. Your dog, we kicked it for fun. Liam and I laughed about it. Melinda's face drained of color. Claire, this is supposed to be a counseling session. Claire barked. I lied. I don't want reconciliation. I want a divorce and the house. I'm done. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The door slammed, leaving the room in stunned silence. Melinda stood frozen, her wide eyes betraying her shock. Franz rose slowly, his expression cold and calculating. His piercing gaze locked on Melinda, silently conveying his disdain for her understanding of the situation. You don't get it, do you? He said, his voice smooth yet tinged with frustration. This isn't about reconciliation. It's about power, control, and ensuring I get what's mine. Melinda opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, her eyes pleaded with him, her professional demeanor cracking. Please, Franz, she whispered, her voice trembling. I can help you. Franz interrupted, his tone sharp and commanding. You'll do as I say, right? His stare bore into her, and for a fleeting moment, fear flickered in her eyes. Melinda seemed to shrink under the intensity of his words, her composure slipping. Franz gave her one last icy glance before heading toward the door. I'll be back, he said flatly, leaving her standing in stunned silence, caught between shock and regret. The courtroom was heavy with tension as Judge Parker reviewed the revised divorce petition before him. Unknown to those present, Parker was Melinda's uncle and had agreed to closely examine Claire's actions after her outburst during counseling. His expression was stern, his intent clear. Claire sat at the plaintiff's table, her arms crossed, her defiance evident. Across from her, Franz maintained a calm yet firm posture, exuding quiet confidence. Judge Parker cleared his throat, his tone sharp and authoritative. Mrs. Heron, your petition is contradictory. One moment you're demanding counseling to reconcile, and now you're asking for divorce. No alimony and the house. Care to explain? Claire forced a tight smile. I've decided I only want the house, Your Honor. It has sentimental value. Parker's irritation was palpable. Sentimental value for a house you neither maintained nor respected, he retorted bluntly. Let me make this clear. You'll get 50% of your demand, nothing more. If you want the house, you'll pay Mr. Heron's price. This court doesn't indulge entitlement. Claire's confident facade faltered, but she recovered quickly, her voice laced with indignation. I'm not paying a dime. It's my house. Parker's eyes narrowed. Incorrect. The house belongs to Mr. Heron. You can buy it if you want, or you can take your share of the settlement. The divorce is granted on these terms. Additionally, I'm awarding Mr. Heron full custody of Emily. If you wish to see her, it will be under supervised visitation. Mr. Heron is also waived child support. The gavel struck with finality. Franz's lips twitched in a faint smirk as Claire's face turned red with fury and disbelief. The judge's decision was clear and unyielding. Divorce granted, Parker concluded firmly. Claire sat at her kitchen table, anxiously dialing the number of the men she had met at the coffee shop. Her fingers tapped nervously as the line rang. When the call connected, a man's curt voice answered, Yeah. It's Claire, she said, her voice shaky. Is the price still expected to increase 20-fold? A pause followed before the man replied, his tone casual but edged with urgency. Yes, but you need to act fast. Someone's already approached Franz. If you wait, you'll lose your chance. Claire's chest tightened. How soon? Now or never, the man said bluntly. Claire ended the call, her pulse racing. Without wasting another moment, she called Liam. We need to see Mike, she said as soon as he picked up. We need the money immediately. 600,000? Liam asked, his disbelief clear. Are you sure this will work? We don't have a choice, Claire snapped. Mike is our only option. If we don't act now, we'll lose everything. Liam sighed heavily. Fine, I'll set it up. Minutes later, they stood in Mike Baker's dimly lit office. The room reeked of cigars, and the oppressive atmosphere was suffocating. Mike sat behind a massive desk, scrutinizing the pair with an unreadable expression. I need $600,000, Claire said, her voice tense but direct. Can you help me? Mike leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His eyes narrowed as he assessed them. I can't, he said slowly. But I don't give money for free. There's always a cost. Liam straightened, his jaw tight. What's the deal? Mike smirked slightly. Mortgage your house to me for $300,000. The rest you pay back within a month." Claire exchanged a tense glance with Liam before nodding quickly. "We'll do it," she said, her voice barely audible. Mike's smirk widened. "Good, you'll get the money, but don't forget, failure to repay comes with consequences." The next day, Claire and Liam sat across from Franz in the lawyer's office. The tension was thick, every movement loaded with unspoken hostility. A stack of paperwork sat between them, and all that remained was the exchange. Claire pushed a check across the table, her fingers trembling slightly. $600,000 for the house, she said, trying to sound confident, though her voice wavered. Franz glanced at the check briefly before slipping it into his coat pocket. His expression remained unreadable, and silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. Claire hesitated before speaking again, her voice soft. "I'm sorry," she said, struggling to hold his gaze. "I shouldn't have cheated. I lied about being pregnant. It was all just to make you lose control. I'm sorry for everything." Liam shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes fixed on the table. Franz's cold, steady gaze stayed locked on Claire. Slowly, he rose. The scrape of his chair was loud in the stillness. Claire tried again, her voice firmer. "It's over now. I'm glad it's over. I really do wish you the best." Franz finally spoke, his tone low and emotionless. "You should see Emily," he said. "She's in the hospital getting dialysis. She almost lost her kidneys because of an infection you ignored. You owe her an apology." Claire's expression faltered, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Emily? I don't understand." "She's your daughter," Franz said flatly. "And you owe her more than words. I'm done here, but you should think about what you owe her." Without waiting for a response, Franz turned and walked out, leaving Claire and Liam in stunned silence. That evening, Claire sat on her apartment couch, swirling a glass of wine. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the liquid as she leaned back, trying to shake the weight of the day. Liam lounged beside her, his arm draped casually around her shoulders, a smug smirk on his face. "This might all work out after all," Claire said, her tone light as she stared into her glass. Liam chuckled, raising his drink. The house, the money, or finally being rid of Franz. Claire smirked. "All of it, everything's finally coming together." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Unless we're walking into another mess." Claire chuckled, brushing off his concern. "We've got this, but I should check in with those guys. Make sure the plan's on track." Liam gave her a skeptical look. "You think they're still reliable?" "They better be," Claire said confidently. She picked up her phone and dialed, but the call went unanswered. Frowning, she tried again. Still nothing. "Maybe they're busy," Liam offered, sensing her frustration. "Maybe," Claire muttered, setting the phone down. "I'll try tomorrow." The next morning, Claire grabbed her phone the moment she woke up, dialing the same number with increasing urgency. The line rang and rang, but no one answered. She tried again, still nothing. Her frustration turned to panic. "Why the hell won't they pick up?" she muttered. Liam, groggy from the night before, rubbed his eyes. "What's going on now?" "They're not answering," Claire snapped, pacing the room. "Something's wrong." "Maybe you're overthinking," Liam said, trying to calm her. "No," Claire shot back. "I need answers. I need to know what's happening." Without another word, Claire grabbed her purse and stormed out, with Liam reluctantly following. They arrived at the address from the business card, but what they found wasn't what they expected. A garish neon sign blinked over a strip club, the parking lot nearly empty. "This can't be right," Claire whispered, dread creeping into her voice. Liam cursed under his breath. "A strip club? Are you kidding me?" Claire's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her face twisting in anger and disbelief. "I can't believe I fell for this," she muttered. "How could I be so stupid?" Liam stood over her, his frustration boiling over. "You fell for it. We both did. I should have known better, but here we are. Claire looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to get conned like this? Liam shook his head, his voice sharp. Look around, Claire. This was doomed from the start. And now we're both stuck in this mess. Claire pushed herself to her feet, glaring at him. Don't put this all on me, Liam. You're just as much at fault. The tension between them crackled in the quiet parking lot. Finally, Claire straightened, brushing off her tears. Let's go. There's nothing more to do here. The drive back was suffocating, neither saying a word. When they reached the apartment, Claire collapsed into a chair, feeling drained. I don't know what to do now, she admitted. Liam lingered by the door, his hand resting on the knob. Neither do I. After a long silence, Liam finally spoke. You ever think France was behind this? Those guys knew too much about the house and the deal. Claire froze, her mind racing. You think so? That fool must have been setting us up the whole time. Liam nodded grimly. It all adds up. They were probably working with him. Claire's anger flared. He played us. He conned us both. He'll pay for this. Liam crossed his arms. We should have been smarter, but we didn't see it coming. Claire grabbed her phone, determination replacing her despair. I'm not done yet. I'll make some calls. We'll figure this out. Claire anxiously paced the room, making call after call to her real estate contacts. With each rejection, her frustration grew. After the final call, she slammed her phone on the counter, exhaling sharply. It's a dead end, Liam. No one's heard anything about a mall project. There's nothing. It was all a lie. Liam's face darkened as the realization settled. We got played. Those guys set us up. Claire turned away, her mind racing. He made fools of us, Liam, but I'm not letting him get away with this. He's going to pay. Liam eyed her warily. How? What's the plan? Claire's gaze hardened as she stared out the window. Give me time to think. 3 weeks passed, and the pressure on Claire mounted. That morning, she received a blunt text from Mike. Time's up, pay now. With a sigh, she typed back, promising to settle the debt soon. She immediately began calling her contacts, desperate to expedite the sale of the house. The news wasn't good. Market conditions had slowed, and finding a buyer quickly was unlikely. Desperate, Claire accepted a lowball offer 3 days later, selling the house for half its value. She transferred the funds to Mike immediately, but her relief was short-lived when another message appeared. Not enough. You still owe me. Claire's stomach churned as she read the words. What more does he want? She muttered, her voice trembling with frustration. Mike's demands didn't relent, and Claire's desperation grew. Turning to Liam, her voice cracked. I don't know what else to do. We sold the house. We're out of options. Liam rubbed his temples, his face pale. I'll sell my house, he said quietly. Claire's eyes widened. Liam, no, you can't. I can, he interrupted firmly. If it's the only way to get Mike off our backs, I'll do it. Otherwise, we're done for. With no other choice, Liam finalized the sale the following day, handing over his house to Mike. It left them with nothing. No home, no savings, no way forward. As they sat in their barren apartment, the weight of their choices hung in the air. Liam dropped onto the couch, running his hands over his face. We've lost everything, Claire. What now? Claire stared blankly out the window. I don't know, she whispered, but I'm not letting this be the end. Liam leaned against the counter, breaking the silence. This is spiraling out of control, Claire. What happens if we get caught? Claire's jaw tightened. We won't get caught, and we can't let France get away with what he did to us. Liam hesitated, unease flickering across his face. But abducting Emily, that's too far, Claire. We can't come back from that. Claire stepped closer, her voice cold and unyielding. You're right. We can't, but neither can he. He needs to pay for everything he's done to us. Liam stared at her, torn between fear and anger. Finally, he exhaled sharply, his expression hardening. "Fine, let's do it." That night, they sat in their dimly lit living room finalizing the plan. Liam fidgeted, his discomfort evident. "This still feels wrong, Claire," taking Emily. "It's too risky." Claire leaned forward, her tone firm. "We're not hurting her. This is leverage. France needs to know we're serious." Liam shook his head. "And if we get caught?" "Abducting is a felony, Claire." "It's not abducting," she snapped. "I'm her mother. I'll say I just wanted to see her. France can't argue with that." Liam sighed, resigned. "All right, but if this goes south, we're screwed." "It won't," Claire said, her voice filled with certainty. "We'll make him pay." The next evening, Claire and Liam arrived at an abandoned factory. Its decaying walls were illuminated by flickering lights. They parked near the entrance, tension thick in the air. "This is it," Claire said, her voice steady. "We can't mess this up." Liam nodded, his eyes fixed on the darkened building. A shadow emerged from the far end of the yard, moving toward them. The man was tall and cloaked in darkness, a baseball cap obscuring his face. In his hand was a small envelope. Claire rolled down the window as the man approached. "Do you have her?" she asked sharply. The man tossed the envelope into the car and stepped back. "She's inside. Everything's set." Liam ripped open the envelope, revealing a photograph of Emily. Her frightened eyes stared back at them, causing Claire's stomach to twist with guilt. The man extended his hand, the money. Claire glanced at Liam as he handed over the cash, the stack disappearing into the man's jacket with mechanical efficiency. His cold, lingering stare hinted at a deeper warning before he turned and briskly walked away, clearly uninterested in staying any longer than necessary. The next night, Claire and Liam returned to the factory, moving quickly through the rusted gates. Their footsteps echoed in the eerie silence. Near the back wall, they spotted an old van. Inside, a figure slumped against the interior. Her hands were tightly bound, and her face was hidden by a black mask. Her labored breathing broke the stillness, a mix of fear and exhaustion. "Is it her?" Liam's voice was taut with apprehension. Claire's heart raced as she studied the figure. The posture seemed familiar, her slender frame unmistakable. "It's her," she murmured, more to herself than to Liam. They carefully moved the girl to their car. The journey was shrouded in tense silence. Streetlights cast fleeting shadows across Claire's face as she gripped her phone and dialed with trembling fingers. Finally, France's voice cut through the static, low and icy. "Claire." Claire's jaw tightened as she steadied her tone. "I have the girl," she said, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. "If you want her back, you'll need to pay." A heavy silence followed, suffocating in its weight. When France finally spoke, his voice carried a dangerous edge. "You think I'll hand over money without proof?" Claire exhaled slowly, willing her nerves to settle. "You'll get proof when I see the money. That's the deal." Beside her, Liam fidgeted nervously, his eyes darting between the girl in the back seat and the empty streets. Claire raised a hand, silencing him before his panic could escalate the situation. After a tense pause, France's voice returned, sharp and commanding. 700,000. You'll have it. But I want the location now." Claire's pulse quickened. This was the point of no return. Choosing her words carefully, she replied, "Meet me at the old mill on Riverside. Tomorrow night at midnight." Another pause, followed by France's curt response. "I'll be there." Claire ended the call, her hand trembling as she lowered the phone. The enormity of her actions settled like a dense fog around her. Liam's whispered question broke her thoughts. "Do you think he'll show?" Claire glanced at the girl in the back seat, her face still hidden beneath the mask. A pang of guilt flickered in her chest, but she pushed it aside. "He'll come," she said firmly. "He always does." The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Claire and Liam approached the old mill. A light mist hung in the air, adding an eerie stillness to the scene. Ahead, France stood near a dilapidated barn, his silhouette imposing as he held a large bag at his side. "This is it," Claire muttered, her voice low. "No turning back." Liam nodded grimly. "We make the exchange and leave, quick and clean." Claire stepped out of the car, the night's chill biting at her skin. She reached into the back seat, pulling the bound girl upright with Liam's help. Together, they moved toward France, the tension between them palpable. France took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "Let me see her face." Claire hesitated, exchanging a nervous glance with Liam. Slowly, she reached for the mask and pulled it away. The moment the fabric fell, France's expression darkened. "Who the hell is this?" His voice was sharp, his gaze cutting into them. The girl's blonde hair was darker than Emily's, her features completely unfamiliar. Claire's stomach dropped. She turned to Liam, who stood frozen in shock. This was supposed to be Emily," Claire stammered, her voice breaking. "Supposed to be," France growled, his tone filled with menace. "You've been lying to me." Liam stepped forward, desperation in his voice. "It's not what it looks like, France. There's been a mistake. I don't care about your excuses." France's voice was ice cold. "I want Emily, or I walk." The girl squirmed against her restraints, her muffled cries cutting through the tense standoff. Claire's hands shook as she whispered, "This can't be happening." France clenched his grip on the bag, his patience clearly waning. "Figure this out now." Before anyone could respond, the screech of tires shattered the silence. Bright headlights flooded the scene as a black SUV skidded to a halt beside the group. The doors flew open, and Mike stepped out, his frame backlit by the vehicle's harsh glow. His expression was a storm of fury, his eyes locked on Claire. Behind him, two enforcers dragged a man from the back seat, his face bloodied and bruised. The man pointed a trembling hand at Claire and Liam. "They paid me to do it. It was them." Mike didn't even glance at the man. His cold, piercing stare stayed fixed on Claire as he approached. His voice was sharp and venomous. "You screwed up, lady." Claire's breath hitched, panic setting in. "I didn't mean to." "You tried to abduct your own daughter and extort money from France." Mike interrupted, his voice growing darker with every word. "You've hit a new low." France stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he and Mike exchanged a brief knowing glance. "You thought you could manipulate France and walk away." Mike's tone was a menacing growl. "France's family, his enemies are mine." Claire stood frozen, her chest tightening under the weight of Mike's words. Liam instinctively moved to shield her, but it was futile. Mike turned to his men. "Take them." In moments, Claire and Liam were restrained and dragged toward the waiting SUV. Mike's voice was cold and final. "This is over. You're done." As the SUV disappeared into the night, Mike turned to France. His voice was calm yet dangerous. "They crossed me, France. This isn't just about you anymore. They tried to involve my family. That's a line I don't forgive." France stood motionless, his jaw tightening at the mention of Mike's daughter. Though his face remained calm, his rigid posture betrayed the tension coursing through him. He understood exactly what Mike was capable of, and the presence of his men standing watch only confirmed Mike's intentions. The decision had already been made. Mike stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You've got your reputation, and I've got mine. But when someone comes after my family, my daughter, it's personal. There's no walking away from this." His piercing eyes locked onto Francis as he added, "I'm taking care of this now." France didn't flinch, though his expression grew colder. He understood Mike's ruthlessness and couldn't fault him for protecting his own. Raising his hand slightly, he spoke with measured calm. "Agreed. You're right to defend your reputation." He paused, his gaze shifting briefly toward Claire and Liam before returning to Mike. "But I've got a daughter to protect too." His voice turned harder, each word deliberate. "If they're let go, They'll come after her again. That's a risk I can't take. Do what needs to be done. Mike's eyes narrowed, the weight of France's words settling between them. The unspoken understanding passed silently. There was no going back. 3 weeks later, the golden light of afternoon filtered through the trees as France and Emily strolled along the riverbank. The gentle rush of water over rocks blended with Emily's laughter and the happy panting of their dog, Wilbur. For the first time in weeks, France felt a sense of calm return. Emily was recovering, and the darkness of the past felt farther away. Watching Emily toss a stick for Wilbur, France allowed himself a rare smile. The weight he'd carried seemed lighter here, in this moment of peace. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him back to reality. He hesitated before answering, stepping away to give Emily her space. "France," he said, his tone steady but alert. "Hey, it's Joseph," came the cheerful voice on the other end. "I just wanted to thank you, man. Things with Melinda went great. She's incredible. I owe you for setting us up." France smirked faintly, his voice cool. "Glad it worked out, Joseph. You're a lifesaver." "Really?" Joseph added enthusiastically. "Talk soon." The line clicked off, and France pocketed his phone. He turned back toward Emily, who was laughing as Wilbur licked her hand. France crouched down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "No one messes with my dog," and walks away, he muttered with quiet affection. Wilbur wagged his tail as if in agreement. Miles away, a boat rocked gently on the open sea. The sound of waves lapping against the hull was the only break in the silence. Claire and Liam sat side by side, their hands bound behind their backs and heavy concrete blocks shackled to their feet. Their breaths came quick and shallow, panic etched into their faces. A tall man loomed over them, his cold gaze cutting through the still air. He watched them squirm, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and sharp. "You were trouble from the start. Now you're just a problem solved." He yanked Claire to her feet, then dragged Liam up with the same rough motion. They struggled, but the weight of the concrete and their restraints left them powerless. Without hesitation, the man shoved them toward the boat's edge. The icy wind hit their faces, a stark reminder of their impending fate. "No, please," Claire gasped, her voice cracking. "Don't do this." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The man gripped the back of their shirts and with a single push sent them tumbling into the dark waters below. The cold sea engulfed them instantly, the weight of the concrete dragging them downward. Their muffled cries were swallowed by the waves as they sank deeper into the abyss. Claire's lungs burned as she fought against the pull of the ocean, but the crushing weight made it impossible to surface. Beside her, Liam's frantic struggles grew weaker. His face contorted in fear. The freezing water pressed against them, silencing their desperation as darkness closed in. Within moments, it was over. The sea consumed them, leaving the surface undisturbed. The boat rocked gently, its passengers silent. The ocean carried on, indifferent to the lives it had claimed. Back on shore, Mike lit a cigar, exhaling a slow stream of smoke into the crisp night air. His men stood silently nearby, their task complete. Turning toward France, he spoke without emotion. "It's done." France nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Good." The two men exchanged a brief knowing look before parting ways. Mike's reputation remained unshaken, and France's daughter was finally safe. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.